Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru. Chapter 2, the no-win scenario. Captain James T. Kirk sat cramped inside a rec hall reader terminal, elbows on knees, fists balled up beneath his chin. Thumb-high people scurried about the screen in front of him, running first forward, then backward as Kirk changed the tape's direction with a single whispered word. An on-screen explosion splashed the cubicle with light. Darkness rushed in again just as quickly, this time claiming the screen image as well. Only the words, Kobayashi Maru Test 463981-009 complete, brightened the black screen, and then only briefly. I lost. The thought struck Kirk with numbing incredulity, just as it had 5 times before. After being accepted into Starfleet at a younger than standard age, after testing at the top of his academy class every single year, Starfleet stuck him in a 12-meter diameter simulator for less than 5 minutes, and he failed so miserably not even his classmates had the ill grace to laugh. He signaled the reader to replay the tape again as impotent fury burned his disbelief away. Such tenacity should belong to an Andorian, James Kirk. Kirk jerked upright. Outside the doorway to the reader, Lieutenant Commander Konstrev's pale blonde hair was the only thing visible through the dark. It is after student curfew, he continued complacently. You should be in the barracks. Kirk had engaged in late-night discussions with Konstrev, too frequently to believe the computer expert would report him now. Turning back to the reader and the frantic scenario again filling the tiny screen, he dropped his chin into his hand again. I wanted to see this one more time. I want to figure out what the hell I did wrong. Konstrev folded his legs beneath him and sat on the floor outside the cubicle. The Kobayashi Maru? Kirk flicked a startled glance down at the officer, and Konstrev smiled. It is now almost midnight. I think you have reviewed this tape more than once. Kirk fixed his attention on the viewer again before Konstrev commented on his surprise. He didn't like it that the lieutenant commander could read him so easily. I'm timing it. He tried to make the admission sound casual. And I wanted to study the details. I see. Konstrev watched the screen with him for some time. Once, nearly 15 years ago, he remarked, as if Kirk had asked him for the statistic, a student made the Kobayashi Maru test last 11.5 minutes. My commanding officer, Admiral Howell, told me this. He added parenthetically, no one has done so since then. Why do you feel the need to succeed where others failed? Kirk felt the blood come up into his face, and this time didn't stop the outburst that followed. Because I was stupid! It took the Klingons less time to destroy me than it takes me to tell about it. His hands twisted into fists without his thinking about it. He jammed them against his thighs to keep from striking something within the cubicle. I'm good at strategy, he insisted, his voice so soft it was almost a groan. Damn it, Konstrev. I'm a good commander. Konstrev nodded sagely. Perhaps the Klingons are merely better. No. The very thought was too frightening to contemplate. If the Klingons were better in this simple classroom exercise, what would they be like out in the real world? It's just a computer, Kirk finally stated defensively. I should have been able to beat it. Just a computer. Konstrev's thin laughter fell dead in the bigness of the empty rec hall. All the more reason why you could never have beaten it. Kirk fixed him with a wary frown. Konstrev smiled. No one could discuss the intricacies of computer psychology with as much glee and expertise as Konstrev. Kirk sometimes thought binary mental functions were his friend's sacred call. Computers cannot be indecisive, Konstrev told him. Computers can think faster than any biological organism currently known. Computers take their knowledge base from the knowledge of all species, not just from the knowledge of one man's experience. They are smarter than you, faster than you, more patient than you. They also can't feel, Kirk countered. He didn't like being compared to a machine, particularly when the comparison was unfavorable. They have no instinct. They have no heart. Konstrov smiled pleasantly. So you believe spiritually superior biological creatures should triumph over electronics? Kirk turned back to the reader without dignifying the sarcasm with a reply. You should read your philosophy, James Kirk. Earth's Agrippa teaches that all beings are microcosmic representations of the universe around them. A being is born and grows and dies. So the universe was once born, grows old, and will someday die. Your failure in this is only a representation of how all things, great and small, suffer failure until the end of eternity. Accept this and go on. Kirk watched as flames swallowed the Potemkin's bridge for the 6th time that evening. He wasn't really interested in what Agrippa thought of the Kobayashi Maru. Agrippa's grade didn't depend on it. How microcosmic can we be, he asked Konstrov irritably, when individual men die every day, but our species continues to thrive? In the end, entropy claims even the most thriving species. We all fail in the end. Kirk slapped off the tape player with an angry swat of his hand. He'd had too much of philosophy for one night. Good night, Konstrov, he announced shortly. Konstrov stood without protest. Good night, James. It was like a bad nightmare. Smoke obscured Kirk's vision for the 2nd time in as many weeks. Fans roared into life overhead, swirling back the gray-black cloud like a curtain as the simulator cracked open with a loud hydraulic hiss. The students scattered throughout the ruined bridge set looked around in embarrassed confusion. Their grime-smeared faces and averted eyes tore at Kirk's already guilty heart. I failed them. He stared fixedly at the navigation helm console as Admiral Howell stepped onto the bridge. Howell, his dark eyes glittering with sympathy, paused in the arc where the view screen once hung and announced, "The simulation is now over." Almost as a single body, the cadets exhaled in relief. Kirk couldn't help but marvel, even through his despair, that one calm voice could reassure an entire bridge crew following such a total disaster. He envied Howell that steadiness, a steadiness he was once vain enough to believe he possessed himself. "You will have 30 minutes to clean up and organize your thoughts," Howell continued, apparently oblivious to Kirk's humiliation. "We'll meet in Kare Conference Hall at 10 o'clock to review your performance. Dismissed." The cadets filed off the simulator in groups of 2 and 3. Still shaken, their movements too quick and broad, their voices too hushed or too loud, they abandoned Kirk without a backward glance. As well they should, he thought bitterly. A 2nd class of cadets, a 2nd starship, a 2nd Kobayashi Maru, a 2nd failure. It terrified Kirk to think this might be the beginning of a trend. "Are you going to join the rest of us, Cadet Kirk, or wait here until the maintenance crews sweep you away?" Kirk flashed a look at Howell's smiling eyes and forced himself not to look away again when he realized he was blushing. "I was reviewing my performance. I think I'm ready to leave now." Howell waved Kirk back into the command chair when the cadet started to rise. "Reviewing your performance?" the Admiral echoed when Kirk stopped and looked at him, but refused to sit back down. "Didn't you get enough of that the other night?" Kirk snapped his mouth shut the moment he realized it was hanging open. "Konstrov told me nothing," Howell finished for him. "But I know the tape of your last Kobayashi Maru was checked out overnight. You were late for bed check, and Konstrov showed up at my office late and sleepy for his duties the next day." He stepped forward to lean across the navigation console, chin in hand. "Mr. Kirk, do you realize your reaction time to this test was well above average for this kind of encounter? Both times?" Kirk felt his face redden again. "I didn't bother to time myself, Admiral." That wasn't entirely true. He had studied his first scenario enough to know it took him 4 minutes, 37.03 seconds to die. He thought it took a little longer this time, but he wasn't sure. "Both times you executed flawless approaches. You deviated from the books when applicable, and your crew gave you admirable assistance, especially considering that none of them has actually served on board a starship." Hal cocked one eyebrow and gave Kirk a curious grin. I didn't expect the Reinhold pirouette this time. I'm not even sure that's possible with the Constitution-class ship. But Admiral Walgren gave you points for trying. He isn't an easy man to impress. I lost my ship. Words crept out of Kirk before he could stop them. An agony of shame at his lack of control made him turn to examine the shattered bridge around him. I lost my crew. Twice. You did everything you could. I should have done more. Hal shrugged with such infuriating calm that Kirk wanted to hit him. Maybe. But it wouldn't have made any difference. Kirk started to protest. He'd studied the great commanders since he was a boy. He knew that Cord, Garth of Izar, or Shaitani would have wrenched victory from the jaws of even this defeat. God, it was Shaitani he tried to emulate in his first scenario, and even then he'd failed. And that was impossible. Staring into Howell's seamed face, Kirk looked for some confirmation of what he'd already intuited. He didn't understand why, but he knew now. Knew and hated Howell and all the others for forcing him to face such a scenario. You planned this, he accused in a quiet voice. Both times. You knew I was going to lose. I know everyone is going to lose. Howell pushed himself upright and matched Kirk's glare. It's the nature of the game, Mr. Kirk. No one wins. Howell didn't seem angry at Kirk or Kirk's newly discerned knowledge, so the ensign didn't interrupt him when he continued. The Kobayashi Maru is a no-win scenario, Howell explained. In real life, you only get to face this sort of failure once, but it's something every commander has to be ready for. He gestured toward the smoke-grimed panel in front of him. No matter what you do, the computer adjusts for it and compensates. We've drawn knowledge from every commander who ever lived. None of them could beat this computer now. There will always be more Klingons, more damage, less time. Kirk nodded, understanding better than he thought Howell realized. It cheats. Howell's laughter surprised him. Of course it cheats, because the point of the scenario is to not let you win. That's all the computer's programmed for. That's all it knows. But that isn't fair, Kirk argued. He folded his arms stubbornly across his chest. When you said I could take this as many times as I wanted, was that a lie too? No, Hal shook his head. You can take it until hell freezes over, or until the end of the semester, whichever comes first. But it won't make any difference. Then why tell me this? Why not let me do it and do it and do it, just like everybody else? Because, Hal smiled thinly, everybody else doesn't. No one's taken this test twice in over 20 years. The smile faded, and Kirk thought he sensed true concern in the Admiral's dark eyes. I thought telling you the punchline might change your mind. I didn't want to see such a fine student waste his time on losing. When he stepped off the dais, Kirk tried to do it with a determination worthy of gods. He wasn't sure if he succeeded. He felt abysmally small. We'll see, was all he said to Howell as he stepped down. The World Library Annex in Old El Cerrito had nothing on the Kobayashi Maru, not a single book or article or footnote reference in even the most obscure journal in the galaxy, of course. Kirk drummed his foot as he waited for the shuttle that would return him to the academy, damning himself for even hoping write-ups existed, especially after his failure to find any references in the academy's own library. The 14 tapes in his jacket pockets clicked like out-of-tune maracas as the December wind whipped all around him. Kirk jerked the front of his windbreaker closed, then crossed his arms in frustration. Kobayashi Maru didn't exist outside the confines of that damned simulator. No one spoke of it. None of the textbooks mentioned it. None of his exhaustive searches of the Federation computer banks found even the vaguest reference to anything by that name, not even a real spaceship. If it weren't for his own dreams, Kirk could almost imagine he'd never really taken the test at all. He couldn't count how many times in the last month he'd tossed awake at night, angry and sweating, only to spend the rest of the night in the barracks bathroom plotting strategies. The fine line between failure and winning had gnawed at his soul. After the failure of his first computer searches, he acquired information on other military defeats. If he couldn't learn success from the masters, he would learn failure from them instead. Some of the defeats were foolish, so easy to overturn that They were hardly worth consideration. Earth's own George Custer at Little Bighorn, who would have slaughtered the Cheyenne if he'd only waited for the rest of his troops. Babin Rukbat V, who would never have deployed his Sixth Fleet to the system at all if he hadn't been too obsessed with owning Rukbat to pay attention to the rumors of Romulan ambush. Others were honest defeats that the commanders at the time could never have changed. The Hoshi offensive throughout the Magellan sector. Earth didn't know about the transporter in those days. Vernier at Gast, whose soldiers died slowly from curite poisoning before anyone knew what curite was. After the battles, then, he studied the commanders. Garth, Babin, Shaitani, Hoshi, Iga, Cord, Friendly John, Vaughn. Biographical information and statistics on their battles reeled about his head every waking moment. He dreamed the Battle of Tyatrus was only last night, and he won it, too, despite the odds. Where Friendly John had been food for the Mika, Kirk had routed the Mika into the sea. He even remembered how. Now, when he was awake, he could recount every move he'd made, every order given, and they were brilliant, all of them. Sitting on the shuttle between the academy grounds and the library, he sketched and figured and planned until he could overturn all those historic victories as if they were preschool disputes. Some of them he could overturn in less time than it took to enact the original conflict. Some of them he could avoid altogether. Some of them he could end before they would even be considered started. And on the heels of such successes, his thoughts always turned to Kobayashi Maru. In so many ways, the test was more complex than anything he could find in his historic references. The computer knew everything, no matter how obscure or unlikely. Klingon reinforcements could arrive out of nowhere, no matter that the neutral zone never hosted more than 4 unreported Klingon cruisers. Kirk had piles of handwritten notes hidden under his mattress at the barracks, notes that sometimes resembled flowcharts more than battle plans. 12 times now, he'd constructed winnable strategies to the Kobayashi Maru. 12 times he'd countered his own schemes by beefing up the computer's knowledge, increasing the Klingon forces. It was like trying to win a war against Gad. No matter what he conceived of, more Klingons could always converge or simply not take damage or fatally damage his own ship with weapons that shouldn't have penetrated the screens. Kirk was bound by the laws of physics, while nothing bound the computer but some programmer's sadistic imagination. Without the framework of reality within which to work, literally anything could happen. So Hal was right. Kirk would lose every time. It's the nature of the game, but it wasn't fair. When Kirk stepped off the shuttle, he found the Academy quad predictably empty. The midwinter rain having chased most of the students inside for the weekend. And upcoming finals didn't help. Kirk would have stayed to study himself, but Saturdays were the only time when he could venture off grounds to the library, and he didn't want to waste what might be his last chance to collect data before the end of the semester. Halfway across the windy quad, Kirk spotted a solitary figure beneath the arch of one of the elevated walkways. A bulky parka smothered the individual's identity, but the flared black trousers marked him as a member of Starfleet. Grinning, Kirk redirected his course to join his snow-suited comrade. He didn't realize it was Konstrev until he stepped up alongside and the lieutenant glanced at him curiously. The computer expert's pale blue eyes looked so appropriately chilled inside the parka hood that Kirk had to laugh. "What are you doing out here?" he asked when Konstrev returned to studying the back end of the quad. "I'm attempting to adjust to the weather," he replied. "I shall be studying at the Academy for 2 more Earth years and would like to be able to leave the buildings in the winter." He was trying to sound reasonable, but the defensive edge to his voice betrayed that others had asked him the same question today. Kirk nodded agreeably, turning to follow Konstrev's gaze so that the sight of the parka wouldn't move him to laughter again. "You're lucky the Academy's in San Francisco," he commented. "Most humans don't even consider the weather here to be cold." "I am not most humans." Indeed, it was a very rare human that was born and raised on Vulcan. When Konstrev volunteered nothing further, Kirk asked, "It doesn't get cold on Vulcan?" "They have a winter season," Konstrev allowed, but not so severe as this. The summers are much warmer as well and approach 50 degrees centigrade when the year is not bad. Kirk whistled appreciatively. I thought humans boiled at that temperature. Not me. They stood side by side for several silent minutes. Kirk watched a flock of dry leaves chase themselves across the flat stone, trying not to personify the skittering dervish as some army he should try to outmaneuver. It only half worked, and he made himself look some other way as the leaves settled into a silent pile again. Where have you been today? Konstrev asked him. He had been watching the leaves as well, and Kirk couldn't help but wonder if he somehow knew what Kirk was thinking. World Library Annex, Kirk admitted. I was looking for more information on the test. If Konstrev knew, there was no sense trying to deny it. Konstrev shook his head, jamming his hands deeper into his parka pockets. I would never travel so far from the buildings on such a cold day. Where I grew up, Kirk told him, this isn't cold. During the winter in Iowa, that's the area of Earth where I grew up, the temperatures can get down to as much as 60 degrees below 0 centigrade. Konstrev made a distinctly unhappy noise. I suppose you have snow as well? Kirk sighed. Where the land is mostly flat, the snow lies across it like icing on a cake, and the morning sunlight turns it so bright it hurts your eyes to look at it, like a whole sheet of stars just packed together on the fields, until there isn't even space between them. And you can roll it up into snowmen or pack it together with your hands to throw at your brother. He smiled in memory of more than a dozen Iowa winters with his fingers numb and stupid as clay, his breath rushing out of him in feathery clouds of steam. I couldn't even begin to explain all the things snow can mean to someone who grew up with it. Snow is more than just chemistry. It's a whole part of growing up. Konstrev didn't answer for a long time. After a moment, Kirk glanced over at his friend, surprised to find Konstrev staring attentively across the empty quad, as though valiantly trying to envision the world Kirk depicted. Maybe I'll take you to Iowa someday, Kirk added, feeling suddenly foolish. It's easier just to show you. Konstrev nodded absently. You have a poet's soul, James Kirk, he stated seriously. Why do you wish to spend all your time making war? I don't want to make war, Kirk told him. You study this test, Konstrev pointed out. You spend more hours in the libraries than you spend in your own bed. You study destruction and tactics. Isn't this war? No, Kirk countered. It's a principle. He stepped in front of Konstrev to break the instructor's eye contact with the non-existent snow. I don't believe in the no-win scenario, he told him. I don't believe it's fair to ask students to accept a concept I don't think is valid. The no-win scenario is the basis of our universe, Konstrev replied. Depending on which point of view you employ, someone always loses. That's garbage. If you always win, someone else must lose. Isn't that so? The thought bothered Kirk profoundly. He fingered the computer tapes, suddenly embarrassed and frightened to think that so much of his personal philosophy could be shattered with so simple a statement. It's not the same thing, he argued, albeit weakly. Losing and not winning aren't the same thing. I believe you can lose. I believe you can die. I don't believe there's such a thing as a situation that's impossible to win. Konstrev studied his face for a moment, his pale eyes disconcertingly earnest. Turning away, he stated at last, Perhaps you are right, but if what you tell me about this test is true, it isn't intended to accurately represent reality, so why concern yourself with it? Because, Kirk stopped, his train of thought suddenly stymied by the idea blossoming in his mind. Because it isn't real, he gasped as the idea took form. Because it isn't fair. It cheats. He caught Konstrev by the shoulders and shook him joyfully. It cheats, Konstrev, which means I don't have to play by the rules either. Konstrev looked uncertain. I believe tampering with test results is frowned upon. 2 negatives make a positive, don't they? But cheating twice makes for a fair test. Kirk cut him off. Trust me on this. I'm a command cadet. Kirk darted into the cadet barracks a breathless 7 minutes before the wake-up call. Curled up beneath his bed covers, fully clothed, he crammed a handful of quilt into his mouth to muffle his panting. "What's happened to me?" he wondered, somewhat horrified. Only a few weeks ago, before the Kobayashi Maru, staying out beyond curfew was unthinkable. He'd been the good little soldier, considering without doubting, questioning without disobeying. Now he felt at war with his superiors over a philosophical issue he'd never even considered before. A war that would end precisely 3 minutes after 10 today. His heart hammered excitedly at the prospect. When the wake-up call sounded, Kirk's bunkmate didn't even ask why the young cadet was under his covers, boots and all. Kirk assumed the other man had seen this often enough in the past few days to excuse Kirk's idiosyncratic sleeping habits as beneath mention. "You'll see," Kirk told him silently as he hastily tucked down the covers on his own bed. "Soon everyone will be able to guess where I've been nights." His first 2 classes came and went with all the speed and grace of a dying man dragging himself across the desert. At 10 o'clock, he was released from class to report to the simulator. Cadets craned in their seats to watch him stride stiffly for the exit. He wondered what they would say if they knew his hands were cold and his mind was numb with indecision. He wondered what Admirals Howell and Walgren would say when the test was over. A collection of students from the security division already milled about the bridge set when Kirk arrived. He reported to the monitoring officers and took his seat at the command chair. He felt as if he were walking through cold jelly, moving so slowly that everyone must see that he was hindered by his vague sense of guilt, that he was actually afraid of going through with this, even after investing so much time in scheming. The arms of the command chair were unyielding beneath his grip. Kirk had the test nearly memorized by now. He watched the cadets around him frown seriously over their instruments until the helmsman turned to request coordinates for avoiding the Klingon neutral zone. Kirk could have cued the senior officer who was serving at communications. "Captain, I'm receiving something over the distress channel." The words, "Put on speakers," sounded clear and confident, even though his mouth felt impossibly dry. "Imperative," a frightened voice whispered through a symphony of static, as the comm obeyed Kirk's command. "This is a Kobayashi Maru. 19 periods out of Altair 6. We have struck a gravitic mine." Kirk didn't wait for the plea to finish. He'd heard it too many times to care for the artifice anymore. A certain amount of cooperation was expected, however, so he pretended concern as he asked, "Kobayashi Maru, this is the USS Potemkin. Can you give us your position?" "Gamma Hydra," the distant voice replied. "Section 10. "The neutral zone," the navigator gasped. Kirk leaned on his fist to hide a smile. "Hull penetrated. Life support systems failing. Can you assist, Potemkin?" "I don't know why I'm smiling," Kirk marveled, still masking his grin. "Flunking out of command school is hardly funny." He had a dreadful premonition that out was exactly where he was headed. So far, nothing about the test had differed, not by a second or a syllable. Had he done it? He was hardly a computer expert. "Potemkin, we're losing your signal. Can you assist?" "Take us in," Kirk ordered, straightening. He didn't even ask to see the stats on the fuel carrier. He'd looked at them the first time he took the test, hoping to gain information. He'd looked at them the second time, hoping to maintain the illusion that he didn't know what to expect. This time he didn't even care. "Captain, that would be in direct violation of treaty," the executive officer began. "I'm well aware of that, thank you. But if I'm going to go down, I may as well go down in flames. Helm, raise shields, just in case." "Aye, aye, sir." The computer had barely finished warning them that they were now entering the Klingon neutral zone when the communications officer yelped, "I've lost the signal," and the science officer reported, 3 Klingon cruisers closing on our stern." "Evasive action," Kirk called, gripping the arms of his chair in anticipation of the blow he knew was coming. It jolted the simulator, exploding the helm console into flames before any of his bridge crew could acknowledge. "Full power to screens!" A lithe young woman stepped over the dead helmsman to stab at the controls. "Screens are dead, Captain!" Kirk spared only a short glance of irritation at his dying navigator. He slammed one hand on the arm of his command chair, wishing he could hurt something besides himself with the gesture. "Contact the Klingon vessels. Tell them we're on a rescue mission." He stared accusingly at the view screen, knowing Howell and the others were watching and wanting to burn them with his anger. Black space and 3 gunmetal blue war dragons stared back at him in sinister silence. He didn't even realize the communications officer had never responded until the executive officer prompted. "The captain told you to raise the Klingon commander, mister." The communications officer stammered helplessly for a moment. Kirk swung the command chair about in time to see the communications officer close his eyes as if in apologetic prayer and timidly touch a button. "Coming on screen now, sir." Kirk couldn't help uttering a short cry of surprise. "This is Commander Kozor," announced a guttural voice, distorted by the intership band, "of the Kayam." Behind the rough baritone, Kirk could hear other computer-generated Klingons growling and bustling as they went about their computer-generated duties. "You have entered Federation neutral zone against treaty. In name of Klingon Empire, Kayam declares war." Jerking about in his chair, Kirk endeavored to assume what he hoped was an expression of cultured confidence. The Klingons might not be able to see him, but the monitoring officer certainly could. "This is Captain James D. Kirk of the USS Potemkin." It was the first time he'd ever said his name that way. The sheer excitement of it made him short of breath. "We are on a rescue mission in search of a civilian freighter, registered with the United Federation of Planets. We mean no harm, but we will defend ourselves if necessary." "Captain Kirk," the Klingon commander parroted. "The Captain Kirk." Kirk fought a smile as his bridge crew exclaimed in a single voice, "The Captain Kirk?" The dead navigator began to laugh. Kirk cleared his throat and went on, "I'll prove it if you force me." The Klingon commander barked to the others in gruff Klingonese. "That will not be necessary," he said in a more subdued tone. "Report coordinates of freighter, and Kayam will offer all assistance. Captain Kirk." Somehow, the navigator's braying laughter destroyed the solemnity of the moment. Kirk, his head spinning, returned his crew's stunned stares with a smug grin. "Gamma Hydra, Section 10. We would greatly appreciate your escort, Kozor." "Of course, Captain Kirk. Whatever you require." By the time the test was over, 18 minutes, 27 seconds had elapsed. Kirk commanded the recovery operations in a giddy daze, somewhat amazed to discover that there was a Kobayashi Maru to be rescued at all. The crew performed beautifully. The Klingons were uncommonly cooperative, and Kobayashi Maru's master, Kojiro Yance, even agreed to have dinner with Kirk that evening. The simulator still stank of seared wiring and melted plastic when the view screen cracked to admit Admiral Howell. Overhead fans vacuumed away the worst of the smoke, but for every whiff whisked away, another rose from the simulated damage. Spidery glimmers of liquid crystal crawled across the soot-streaked floor. Howell paused just inside the starship's view screen and shook his head at the laughing, shouting cadets who pushed past him on their way to the conference hall. Kirk stayed in the command chair, his head angled downward as he stroked the command chair like a prized horse. "We did it," he thought contently. "We beat the no-win scenario." Not specifically the no-win, since he had changed conditions, but that seemed a minor technicality at the moment. "That was an interesting performance," Howell said when the last of the cadets were gone. "Admiral Walgren is talking of having you court-martialed. I'll have my hands full trying to dissuade him." He stepped around the helm console to sit. Kirk grinned and studied the bridge speculatively. "I did succeed." "What did you prove?" Howell's voice was confused but honestly curious. "The cheating pays off?" Relegating his solution to the realm of simple cheating stung Kirk's pride. "Consider me a conscientious objector. I don't think of it as cheating when the rules of the game are unfair." "I explained that to you already," Howell began, but Kirk interrupted to say again, "I don't believe in the no-win scenario." "And you think reprogramming the simulation so the Klingons believe you're a famous starship captain proves you're right?" Howell studied Kirk narrowly. "What are you going to do when you run up against Klingons in real life? Convince them all you're Garth of Izar?" Kirk straightened in the command chair, feeling suddenly protective of some nebulous future ship and career. "I'll deal with that as I come to it, sir," he said stiffly. "I may not have to convince them of anything at all." Some indefinite emotion flickered through Howell's dark eyes and was gone before Kirk could identify what he'd seen. When the ensign frowned faintly, the older officer smiled and rose from the helmsman's chair. "Forget I asked," he acquiesced. Stepping to the foot of the dais, he looked up at Kirk with a subordinate reporting for duty. "Let's go see what the rest of the class has to say this time," he suggested. "I have a feeling you've got quite a busy time ahead of you." Kirk stood slowly and joined Howell on the empty deck. "Yes, sir. I guess I deserve whatever they give me." Howell smiled at him kindly. "Yes, Mr. Kirk, I think you probably do." Somehow, Kirk sensed he wasn't just talking about the rest of the day.